right, the committee of the whole meeting will now come to order at 7 o'clock p.m. Present are all members of council, the mayor, the directors of law, HR, economic development, recreation, special assistant to the mayor, and guests. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to hear the economic development strategic plan. So with that said, I'll open it up to Mayor Jones. Any comments?
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, members of council. Thank you for calling this committee of the whole meeting to hear from the consultant team that has been working with Director Upton to put forward a plan to guide the economic development efforts of our city. I would like to emphasize tonight that this is a living, breathing document and that this plan is about action. Although the report has just been finalized, we've already been putting key recommendations into action. We've submitted a budget that increases capacity in our building division and our economic development divisions. One of the key recommendations was pillar number 3, organizational improvements. The administration has also advanced legislation authorizing the recreation of the North Olmsted Community Improvement Corporation, and that legislation was authorized by council last fall. To be clear, the plan before you tonight does not present a silver bullet or a moonshot strategy such as trying to land the next big project. Rather, it puts forward concrete and meaningful steps that the city can take to better position itself to attract investment in the future. I would now like to hand the presentation over to Director Upton, who is going to introduce our presenters this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Over the last 7 months, I've had the pleasure of working with formerly known as Pogmeyer, now Kleinfelder, and the Insight Advisory Group. With us tonight is Sean Joyce and Jennifer Six from Insight Advisors, and Lauren Falcone from Pogmeyer, now Kleinfelder Group. And we really had a great time in thought partnership working through this strategy. It's one where there wasn't public meetings because we were really focused on the analytical piece of economic development, really getting into the nitty-gritty and the data of how we're able to best position ourselves to attract investment, help the companies that are already here grow, and then I think most importantly, create an organization where we get to yes quicker for the folks that are looking to do business inside of this. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Lauren, Jennifer, and Sean, and welcome any questions of the group, of myself, or our consultant team. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for your time this evening. It was a great project, and this was our team. I'm with Kleinfelder, obviously, and you can see the rest of the group from Kleinfelder. We had certified planners, GIS specialist, and then we had the numbers people from Insight. We worked with Jennifer, Janie, and Heather during this process. And we appreciate the city hiring us. We appreciate Max's help. We really enjoyed working with him on this important project. He was very responsive to our firms and also to the companies and key stakeholders we worked with. We applaud you for completing the strategy. It's very important to keep planning, and obviously you have a very strong comprehensive plan from 2015 and the Go North Olmsted plan. And actually this was part, this economic development strategy was part of your Go North Olmsted plan. So that's great. We love to see that as planners. Seeing you go through the planning process and then implementing. And then before I get started, I did hear that there were some typos in the final report. It had to do with InDesign, and again, I apologize. It's not something we ever want to say or have to say, but we will get that fixed. And you do have 3-ring binders, so we'll get those pages. We did have our marketing group go through it, and apparently there's a different kind of spell check to use with InDesign, and it was not used. So we will get that to you, and again, we apologize for the error. Services provided, obviously Kleinfelder, formerly Pogmeyer. I've been working in the Cleveland area for probably the last 20 plus years. We specialize in municipal planning, economic development, grants, engineering, architecture, interior design, and surveying. And again, we want to utilize the best practices for economic development to get a project funded or get a project done. And then we partnered with Insight. They're a leading economic development and government relations firm in the state, headquartered in Akron. And obviously they're very familiar with economic development in this region. This is our process, and I don't know how many of you were involved in the actual RFP or RFQ and our response, but basically we always look at kind of a five-phase approach, and this is what you do in any sort of typical planning process. We want to make sure that the report is laid out in this format, so obviously the binders you have in front of you, we have a phase 1, evaluation of current conditions, phase 2, recommendations for business retention, 3, business attraction, 4, organizational improvements, and then 5, final report. So basically tonight we're just going to give you a quick highlight of the report and then have time for questions afterwards. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to talk about some of the current conditions. Thank you. Good evening. Part of what we focused on was in the retail shed, Great Northern Mall, and the shopping around Lorraine. And what we looked at in running some trends is that the market demand is still relatively strong. We talk about recession, we talk about inflation, but the consumer is still spending. It is driven by the market, but until some of our employees start to lose jobs and it really starts to take an effect on their spending habit, we don't see that as being a critical need at this point. We do expect some additional growth, and we know that you have growth opportunities in the retail corridor for additional retail opportunities. We do believe that consumer spending, again, will dictate the market, but we did a little further analysis on Great Northern Mall and found that out of the 615 malls nationally, Great Northern was about 421 and ranked about 15 in Ohio out of the 25. So there is some room for improvement, room to grow. Maybe an area of focus would be on those additional retailers or additional outlets that you could consider. When we looked at your labor force, there's a chicken and egg concept with jobs versus housing. We do believe that there are additional housing opportunities in the city to increase the growth in the population that we currently have, especially when we look at wage earners. We would like to combat that unemployment through local economic development policies that could boost job growth, as well as your employment rate to be more sustainable. So looking at not those big, large companies that have hundreds and hundreds of jobs, but really picking and choosing the markets, the target markets, and the priority industries that you want to focus on, and truly looking at developer and business attraction. When we looked at your GDP, it's a strong market. We're not going to be, this was not publicly driven from the U.S. Census Bureau, so if you wanted us to drill down into some additional zip codes for comparison in other cities, we could do that. But your median household income is high, and it's higher than a lot of communities that we see, so I think you're fortunate there. And I would say keep up the good work, but there's always room for improvement as we look to increase job growth. Obviously, income tax represents the largest source of revenue for your city. We can see that the consumer is still spending, and again, this goes back to my other comment about inflation and or recession. If not threatened out of a job loss, consumers will continue to spend, they will continue to stay employed. It might soften. We see this as being maybe a soft and quick recession, if any, but the indicator is the true unemployment rate. And that would be the predictor that we would want to look for in future headwinds. This is probably one of my favorite slides, is the inflow-outflow, because when you look at what you already know, North Olmsted is still considered a bedroom community, and we certainly want to talk about greater opportunities for living, and if one were to try to look at University Circle, or you want to look at other medical institutions partnering for additional residential opportunities, that could provide first-time down payment assistance, home repair, facade improvements, some ways to incentivize that live-work within the city. When you look at living in the city and employed in the city, that's a pretty small number. And so you look at those that are employed within the city that don't live here, and then you have an influx of people that don't live here that come in here to work. Let's try to marry that up a little bit and bring in new residential opportunities for people that live and work in the city, because we also think that that's going to lead to additional demand for retail and commercial space. Now, there's
so when we look at Moen employees, where do they live? Is there an opportunity to provide additional residential opportunities for them to live here? The majority of your residents take employment outside of the city. Again, can we look at that? Can we try to drill down and where are they working? If we were to look at, say, building a spec building and bringing in 100 new jobs at a $2 million payroll, that's automatically another $40,000 of income tax revenue. If we continue to expand upon that, you're going to have exponential growth over the next couple of years. And that's where that implementation strategy that we get really excited about, because it's not just about planning, it's about actually putting a strategy to work and then implementing that strategy. I have a background in municipal government, and I can't tell you the hundreds and thousands of dollars that we spent on plans that we couldn't do anything with. The architect drew great drawings, but it couldn't be built because it was too expensive, and then other plans that just didn't fit our city. So we really hope that this is a customizable plan for North Olmsted, so it's something you can truly implement. In the retail niche analysis, the average shopper at Great Northern Mall spends about 70 minutes at that location before they move on. Research also from cell phone data tells us that 53% are coming directly from their home to the mall and then going right back home. Very few are continuing on to some other location. And we can drill down into data until we all geek out over exactly where they came from and where they're going. But the majority is they're coming to the mall and they're going home. So how do you capture that to where they're coming from work, going to the mall, going home, coming from home, going to the mall, and then going someplace else out to eat? Really trying to keep them in the city, spending their dollars here. Another good slide to show. It actually looks like everything is hunky-dory in the city of North Olmsted. But one thing I do want to define is a non-store retailer, where you see that really skewed over on the leakage side. That's basically e-commerce and then like catalogs. So it's tough to quantify that. The other leakage is a gas station, but again, zoning will dictate whether or not you will allow another gas station in the city. Interestingly enough, we did another gap analysis that showed that the city could actually benefit from more hardware stores. So something to keep in mind should you have a desire for that. They would not be big box like a Home Depot. So, current conditions, the real estate and site building inventory. We know, and as you know, there is a significant number of underutilized commercial buildings along the Rain Road. This is where we see something like your CIC getting involved in matching facade grants, possibly some forgivable loans. A lot can be said for tuck pointing, peak roofs, nice landscaping, new driveway approach, things like that. We looked at typical rents for Class A and B in 2022, averaged around $22 per square foot for A, 19 for B. We believe that you have a nice mix here, probably more BC, but we would want to be talking to your landlords about what sort of improvement they would be making to some of those commercial and office buildings. And then we're going to talk about the story map in just a little bit as we look to vacant opportunities.
Sure. Thank you. Teamwork here. All right, great. So, benchmarking. We wanted to see what other communities were doing. Obviously, you're competing a lot with Lorraine County, but also other Cuyahoga County communities. So we looked at Brook Park, Euclid, Lakewood, and Parma. And they both have some of the same opportunities and challenges that you guys have. Access to transportation, a strong retail commercial, and an aging building housing stock. So what was interesting, North Olmsted has 5 programs, which is good. But Lakewood has 12, Brook Park has 11, Parma has 7, and then Euclid only has 3. But again, what they're focusing on that maybe you guys are not focusing on is housing and entrepreneurial support to their businesses. So those are 2 kind of points that maybe we need to drive home and think, okay, let's look at our incentives and let's see if we can do something there. And then we kind of spelled out the common themes, data trends, and we put that in the executive summary, but we also put that in, I think, in the actual body of the report. And I'll just hit the highlights. So basically, we heard over and over again, and we know, I've lived in Cuyahoga County my entire life, transport, location and proximity to the highways and the airport is one of your biggest competitive advantages. Strong collaboration and communication is very important, and obviously within the department and also with the business community. And that's just a key to economic development in general. you should be a destination in your own right. There's no reason that people should not come, as Jennifer said, and go to the mall, go out to dinner, do something active in the metro parks. There's no reason that they can't do that. You definitely have a renewed momentum in economic and community development with a number of high profile current projects and projected projects. So again, build on those things to kind of jump the economic development. You obviously can repurpose aging office buildings and commercial strip centers. That will definitely be important as you move forward in economic development. Projected growth for consumer spending demand is expected to increase approximately 15%. So again, you're in a good position to capture that. Economic conditions in the city are favorable. Jennifer mentioned your median household income. That really is a high number. So that's great. I mean, you have people that live here and can spend money. The majority of city residents take employment outside the city. So again, that's something we could work on. And then a variety of housing types and price points is important. I don't know if you all know me from whatever, but I grew up in Westlake and I'm on Westlake Planning Commission. So I'm very familiar with the surrounding area. So I know, what the housing markets are doing. And I think you guys are in a good position to attract people to live and work here for sure.
Well, especially not necessarily affordable housing, but attainable housing.
Exactly.
Right? Bay, River, Westlake, they're pricing themselves out.
Yeah.
I think North Olmsted's in a position now where it could be really, really attractive, especially to new home starts and empty nesters.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's key. And we're looking at that in Westlake right now as the first floor master. How do we get people into cluster homes? Do we have enough cluster homes? Do we have too many townhomes? So again, thinking about things like that, planning for the future. As far as partnerships, again, these are key for economic development. We talked to key stakeholders, as you probably know if you've read the report, and they stressed that partnerships are important. Obviously, economic development is based on strong partnerships. And again, the education component, the business component, developers, and then also nonprofits are very important in order to do economic development to its full potential. Yes. I'm having problems with my laptop, sorry.
If communities aren't talking to their businesses, they're missing the mark. And in a city of this size, we would really like to see, if it hasn't already started, a business retention expansion program, not just for your top 20, but for all of the businesses, especially along the Ring Road. If you have a formal business retention program, then you have a cadence of meetings, quarterly, biannually, whatever seems to work best for how you plan on doing these visits. But also using a CRM program to track that, because then you can look back and see what you did last time that you met with them. It's so much easier, and I know you all know this, but it's so much easier to retain than it is to attract. And this is the time to be talking to businesses, especially as inflation rates and interest rates rise. Look at their pain points, and it could just be dry patch or cold patch a pothole in February because you can't. And whether it's that, or the last thing a mayor wants to do is open up a newspaper and find out that there's a business leaving and she didn't know about it. And so we can't stress that enough. And if the business visits can't always happen, we suggest open office hours, third Tuesday of the month. You make an appointment, you come and see the mayor, you come see Max, but also a business advisory council. And that can be with your hospitals, your larger employers, and also, say, the schools and other foundations. But it's really important because the businesses are the ones that are going to feel the pinch first. And you'll probably know that even post-COVID, when we look at supply chain and we look at gaps and we look at the slowdown in plastics and the slowdown in IT, those are market predictors that you could already be aware of because you're doing those business visits. And again, if we're looking at and that also gives you some headwinds on what is the market doing as far as office, right? We know it's slow, it's even slow enough, but there is an uptick in manufacturing, warehouse, and distribution. So if that's of value to you, you don't want a 100,000 square foot building with 10 jobs, but you would maybe want some smaller transportation, logistics, or distribution that would have 25 to 30 employees in a smaller building. Oh, very good. So again, business attraction. Obviously, we can't let that lie. Team Neo, however you feel about them, Jobs Ohio, also however you feel about them, they are necessary and they are and can be good partners to municipalities of any size. The formal business attraction program can involve Team Neo, Jobs Ohio, because they are the ones that are on the forefront of a lot of the larger opportunities, and they have to be uploaded in Zoom Prospector. It's just one thing that you have to do in order to get Team Neo to recognize you. But by having those sites, buildings, and or other vacant land opportunities in Zoom Prospector, you're on Team Neo's radar. We can bother them at more of a regional and state level to say, hey, we are here, we are looking for business. Again, putting my municipal hat on. We didn't always want to work with Team Neo, didn't always want to work with our local chamber, because you know your city better than anybody else. And so it takes a collective group, whether it's the chamber, city council, mayor's office, administration, to be the ambassadors for your city and to get it noticed. We worked with a city up in northern Ohio that had a deep water port, and Team Neo didn't know about it. And we were shocked. It's 900 acres of a private deep water port owned by Canadian National. And they kept thinking, well, you have your little port authority. No, we have a deep water port in our city. And so if you're not talking about it, they're not going to know about it. So it's really, really important to keep in front of them, as well as other regional entities like site selectors.
Okay, then the third pillar or metric would be organizational improvement. So obviously that's important for economic development too. You know, Max shared with us, I think the mayor just mentioned it too, about the economic development coordinator position that's in the budget. That's great. I mean, you're already starting to implement. But we talk in the report about needing a guaranteed stream of revenue, possibly increasing the bed tax by 0.5%. And not a lot of communities do it up here. It's mostly Franklin and Hamilton County, so Columbus and Cincinnati, where they collect a full 10%. So again, finding that generated, and again, it's not going to be a huge amount of money, but we do know that typically a bed tax is used for growth, to generate funds, and to fund a CIC. And in our experience, putting 100% to safety services is unique, and that's what you guys do here. So again, we're not saying you have to change anything, but we're saying that that is different than other communities. And if you're looking for a guaranteed stream, that might be something. And also TIF funds we talked about too. So that's something that you have to dig deeper into your TIF legislation and decide if you can do that. But I think that's really important. You know, a CIC, it's the first bullet up there, is created with a stream, guaranteed stream of funds. You know, formalizing the relationship between the three departments that do economic development. You know, adding staff members, one in economic and community development, and then one in building, to kind of assist with the current future workload. And then just what I mentioned before, that you become a destination in your own right. And then maybe looking at a complete zoning code audit to make sure, you know, if we're recommending all these things, let's make sure your zoning works so you can do economic development in those areas. And then 4 obviously would be the incentives. You want to develop an environment that encourages businesses to expand and locate in the city, and offer streamlined incentives, so making it easy. And I think that's something that we talked about North Ridgeville doing, that people know when they go to North Ridgeville what they can get based on the investment. So not to say that you have to do exactly the same, but just making it so businesses know what they can get for their program, for their investments in new businesses and expanding. Let's see. I mentioned that you're competing with Lorraine and Cuyahoga County, and that's tough that you're doing. And again, in Westlake, I feel like we do that as well. But a lot of great things are happening here, and you really need to chronicle and publicize it, which I think you do on your website, but keep going with that, kind of highlighting your economic development wins. And then the final deliverable, I see most of you have your binders here, so we kind of tried to make it easy on you. That fold-out placemat is kind of the executive summary, so you can take that with you when you go to meetings, you can take it to grant funding sources, you know, you can take it to Rotary, take it to Kiwanis, whatever organizations you're involved in, and talk about it. And then we have the actual report by chapters, and that's a lot of data or information. But then we also have a story map that is kind of, will be put on your website, so developers and businesses can see what's vacant and what's available. And then also recommendations and implementation strategies, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I think, yeah, that's the next slide. So that was kind of what, so each chapter had recommendations and implementation strategies. So you could see organization, this is organization, you can see the metric, the action item, time frame, responsible party, and funding source. So a lot of times, unfortunately, the city is the funding source, so that probably gave a few people a heart attack. But again, this is not something you're going to do tomorrow. This is supposed to be a planning document that you can use for the next 5-10 years for economic development. I think that's all I want to say about that. But yeah, I think that we tried to spell it out. And then the story map, we'll get you, the link is in the book. It's supposed to be an active link. If you have a PDF of it, you should click off it from the PDF. But it basically shows, you know, red is the city-owned parcels, blue is vacant land. So you do have some parts there you can do economic development with. And calculated, I think the city has 90 acres, and then private-owned is like 239 acres. So again, the best efforts, what we'd like to see is, you know, getting them consolidated, acquired and consolidated, the parcels, and then obviously marketed by the city and Team Neo. And of course, the types of development are going to be dependent on your comprehensive plan, your zoning. So you may need to address the zoning code, which we talked about. But again, talking about using that CIC to have that coordinated effort, funded effort to go out and do economic development. I think there were 30 different parcels, at least on Lorraine Road heading west into Lorraine County, so that might be somewhere you want to focus on. And the CIC can basically do what the market is not patient to do, and take down the parcels and actually take them to market. So the CIC rules and regulations do make economic development easier for communities, and I think a lot of communities that we work with do have a very active CIC, and it does help.
And so we also do a little bit of site selection, and I'll tell you, if a developer looks at this map and goes, wow, look at all these parcels, and then they find out that there's 30 different parcels with 30 different owners, and now you're gonna consolidate all of them, they're gonna immediately go, well, thank you, but we don't have that kind of time. So it's really speed to market. Government wants to work at the speed of business. Government just can't work at the speed of business, but at the very least, to get the sites ready, have them zoned properly, which they are, but have them consolidated, or at least have some sort of ownership over or control of that property. Because once you have the control, then you can dictate what the future will bring.
And I think too, with this map, what I thought was interesting, we worked with Olmsted Township maybe 10 years ago, and Team Neo kept saying they were the last green space to develop in Cuyahoga County. Well, that's not true. I mean, you have some green space here too. So I think that I find it very interesting. So we need to make sure that we have shown Team Neo, I wasn't Team Neo back then, but show the local economic development and also the state that we have this area that we can do, and it's a great location. I mean, you're right there at 480. I really think that's hopefully from this report that'll come out that we can get that consolidated, figured out, and marketed. And then as far as report appendices, Max wanted us to put all the appendices in the back because that's the nuts and bolts that he gets to do with his staff. So it's just for your information. You can read through it, but that's really where he's going to go when he needs to get the backup for what was in the report. And we had the vacancy inventory, a site and building inventory, and incentive benchmarking. We had the key stakeholder interview summaries. We had how exactly to make a business advisory council. And we did that key stakeholder meeting. Everyone was excited about the business advisory council. I mean, that was something they really wanted. We had education partners, we had some nonprofit partners, we had some businesses there. So I think that will really help economic development too. And then obviously recommended incentives. So there's a embassy on that as well. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So I know it's a lot to digest. That's our contact information, and we'll email. I think Max already has the presentation in PDF, so you can get it to you as well. If you have any questions for us, we really enjoy working on the project. We'd love to assist you with implementation, and there's our contact information. But we'll answer any questions you have. Oh yeah, let's anyone fall asleep.
There we go.
Sure.
Who's the chair here again? Mr. President. Okay. Yeah, I think as you looked at what the weaknesses were, I think the aging housing stock, but also a low population based on grant levels, etc. And then you noted that we do have a lot of disparate available property. I'd just be interested to see what that strategy and mix would look like to address not losing more population, but growing some new housing stock and potentially consolidating. If consolidating lots would allow us to do that, I know that's something that we've been hesitant to do in the past of consolidating lots. So I'm just interested to see how those three come together. So what's the next step to get to those decisions and strategies?
Well, I think getting those parts, getting the CIC, I think, up and running, I think is probably the first step. And would you agree that that would be the first step?
It is, because the CIC can act on behalf or as agent for the city and perform some of these tasks kind of under the radar, but still actually acting on the city's behalf, but without having to go to competitive bid. Once a property owner finds out that the city's interested in their property, obviously the price is going to escalate. So doing some due diligence ahead of time and or working with a broker kind of on the QT to start getting options on property is one thing. But I think for an overall master plan that would actually dictate how we're going to do it and then follow the strategy. Just so we're not willy-nilly talking to a variety of property owners, but assembling true land that can be developed. And that also means doing some environmental, some other due diligence, which is cost. But the state does have programs for spec opportunities for land development, and there's monies out there that can assist the city.
And I think deciding how you're going to fund that CIC is priority number one. And then also, I really think you need an incentive for housing stock. I mean, you're doing housing, and that's what I see a lot of focus on now is looking at the houses that are in the $200,000-300,000 range, and then figuring out how to get them, how if people want them to renovate them. So if they're 150 to 350, renovating them to get them ready for a different buyer, and maybe moving some of the people that are empty nesters, moving them into having the availability to move them to a cluster home, and then you've got a whole new housing stock ready for, you know, first-time buyers or people that families. I mean, the 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath house that families typically want. You want to make sure they're in the right house, and that the older population is in the right house for them too. So you're keeping that older population in your community, because you obviously have great community services for everyone here. But I think some sort of incentive to revitalize some of the housing stock, I think, would be huge. Especially then if you start talking to Moen and they're saying this is, you know, we're bringing these people in, they don't know where to live, they can live right here, and, you know, maybe ride a bike to. I mean, that's huge, and I think that we're seeing a lot of that right now, is that active transportation, multimodal transportation, which you're working on right now. So I mean, kind of combining all that to keep going with the economic development.
Jennifer or Dawn, I had a question regarding, I know that you mentioned that Great Northern has a ranking of 15 out of 25 out of malls in Ohio. What was that national ranking? I missed it.
421 out of 615.
All right, and then what were the specific driving metrics that were used to determine those rankings?
It's based on cell phone data.
Okay.
So what we'll do is the software used allows you to pull up a specific parcel and or regional attraction. So Eastwood, Beechwood, Great Northern, those are in itself already on the map. And literally you can click on it and you can run limitless reports. And what this report actually did was, it's called a ranking overview. And it'll rank, and then it'll spit out additional details. So if you'd like to see what that is, we can.
So it's essentially tracking visitors, am I hearing you right?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so it's not necessarily based on revenue or anything like that?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions from council? Mr. Glassman?
Hi, thank you, Mr. President. So one of the broader statements was a forecast of 15% consumer growth. What is the 15% over what timeline? A year?
Was it 5 years?
It was 5 years, yeah. Yep, 5 years.
So we've talked about resourcing the CIC, which we've not had for a long time, and certainly previous iterations didn't have the setup or resources that we're looking at for this. Give us examples of what are meaningful benchmarks in terms of funding that makes a difference for this kind of an effort.
We were just talking about that. I took word to Jennifer.
I was treasurer for our CIC for 12 years, and we never exceeded $1 million. But what we were able to do is leverage $100,000 here, $200,000 here in a revolving loan fund. But it was never going to be enough to actually purchase meaningful property. So I'd say $500,000 to start, upwards of $1 million or more. And whether that comes from foundations, whether that comes from the general fund, ancillary TIF revenue, additional bed tax, a couple $1,000s a year is not going to make a difference. So it really will have to be some sort of meaningful influx in cash. Now, you have some property, the city owns some property. If you wanted to dispose of some of those parcels and to start generating that as your kind of nest egg, that's something that the administration could take a look at, is what are city-owned properties that you're willing to let go of? Whether it's a MODA-owned property to try in a residential neighborhood, or a commercial piece of property that you're never going to develop.
So when you're talking about $500,000, are you talking about annual revenue to the CIC, or we're talking about a seed amount?
Seed amount. Because then as you start to sell property, buy property, you'll be able to leverage that, and then you can go to a bank if you want to, and then take a look at what would be available to you to leverage that. If you already have 50%, can a bank give you another 20 or 30, and then a developer, this should never be CIC alone, unless you want total and complete control over all these properties. but you could definitely partner with a developer. Developers don't expect to come in for free, but also there is an expectation of some sort of public-private partnership, especially if we're looking to take down large tracts of land. But again, that's to Sean's point, that's where state money could come into.
I mean, there's a big focus right now in the state of cover, to put a draft of the budget before finance in Columbus. There's just a report from the Department of Development. It's kind of a caretaker of all these incentives that are coming through economic development. They work with 5 partner agencies, including TVO in this area, to funnel through money to help incentivize development across the state. There are hundreds of millions of dollars in this budget. There's actually $2.5 billion in funds to support site inventory and gathering of massive economic development project sites that could house a project like an Intel and all these things you're hearing about. So there's a big focus from the governor and the rest of the state on economic development across the board. So there are opportunities to capitalize on those incentives. And the time really is now to kind of get lined up to do that.
Because I think there is a push for Team Neo to identify large tracts of land in Cuyahoga County.
Yeah, we're actually working with them to help part of that process, help them get an inventory across northern Ohio of what sites are project ready, what sites can be made project ready. How can they work with cities and townships to help them gather those assets together so that there is really a statewide strategy to continue to attract businesses. So the CIC, it's really about getting that initial fund of cash resources to start doing those acquisitions, and that will hopefully spin into more opportunities. As Jennifer mentioned, you start selling and developing, or again, give you enough credit to work with a bank or a lending institution or other resources, foundations, what have you, to kind of pile into that.
I think I might know the answer to this, but I wanted to follow up on Councilman Glasgow's question. How might a city prioritize asset disposition with respect to real estate, given the 90+ acres that's under our control right now?
Probably some initial desktop due diligence. How many acres each individual parcel is. Is it near residential? Is it near highway? Are you looking to do some transit-oriented development? Maybe you keep it. I mean, you never want to dispose of property willy-nilly, especially when the city owns it, because you can't get it back. Right? And there's not a lot of annexation opportunities here in North Homestead. But I think we would have to probably rank it parcel by parcel.
That was what we were going to say.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Eden.
Thank you. So when you say large tracts of land, how define large? How to see acreage, what's the, compute?
Team Neo's threshold, I think, was it over 80? I mean, they're looking for large tracts of land, which you have. Now, contiguous, we're still looking at a couple hundred. So you're in a nice spot, assuming that we can acquire or consolidate.
Okay.
Any other questions from council?
Just a comment, I mean, I found it interesting, the comps you did, that there weren't any, besides for Lakewood, any like closer west side suburbs that you compared us to, whether you get Fairview from a retail strip standpoint. Was there a reason that there was just none of the west side suburbs are comparable to us?
Max wanted us to look at those. Didn't you pick those communities?
I did, because the genesis of picking those particular suburbs is that they came of age in the post-war industrial period, so 1950 to 1970, and they're largely referred to as edge cities in some of the vernacular. So when you're comparing a city that was largely built out 60 years ago against cities that are built out 20 to 30 years ago, when you're talking about your rivers, your Westlakes, and some of the more exurb cities, the comps aren't necessarily one for one, and then conversely, the housing stock is different. The age of the commercial stock is different, so the capital needs and the incentive suite of incentives will be different because it's seeking to address a different problem than we are. Does that make sense?
It does. I just was surprised Fairview wouldn't be there, given the age and structure of it and proximity.
Fairview's more of a first ring suburb than necessarily edge city per se.
I think so.
I've seen no other questions or comments from council. Any closing comments from administration? Okay. Well, thank you. On behalf of council, thank you. With there being no other items to discuss on the agenda for the committee of the whole, we will close the committee of the whole meeting at 7:41 p.m.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have 2 minutes. No, 15 minutes.
Okay, we'll begin the Public Safety, Health and Welfare Committee meeting this evening at 7:42 p.m. Present are all members of council, the mayor, the directors of law, finance, human resources, economic development, service, recreation, our special assistants, the mayor, and guests. On the agenda this evening is ordinance 2023-27, which is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a 5-year lease agreement with Motorola to install Dispatchers Council Model MCC 7500E through the state purchase program at an annual cost of $162,288.49, and further authorizing the mayor to execute contract documents and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just a brief overview that this was mentioned during the budget process. And any particular questions, we have Sergeant Detective Fiorito with us this evening to answer council's questions or comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions from today? Mr. Weisberg.
I'm fairly certain I know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. This console meets our needs in the event that we continue as is, in the event we join with other communities, and in the event we join with a lot of other communities. Is that correct?
Short answer is yes.
Okay.
Does all of those.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee? Mr. Mann?
Sergeant Fiorito, do you know what the timeline is for actually getting the equipment in?
So the contract pricing that we have from Motorola right now is good for a purchase executed in the first quarter of this year. We execute that by the end of March. We probably get the equipment within about 2 to 3 months. Up and operational. Pending that there's no supply chain issues, but they've quoted us about 2 to 3 months to have everything installed up and running.
Any other questions? Okay. Is suspension being asked for on this piece?
Madam Chairwoman, it's not being requested, but if council would consider only in the sense that, as the sergeant just mentioned, if we could get the equipment ordered, then obviously we will have that in hand sooner rather than later.
Yes.
Okay. All right, then I will make a motion to recommend approval to all of council with suspension for ordinance 2023-27 and ask for a second. Second by Councilman Mann. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. Motion passes with a vote of 3-0, and our meeting concludes at 7:45 p.m. Thank you.
Right, I'd like to start the Building Zone Development Committee meeting at 7:48 p.m. Present are committee members Wimper, Williamson, and Eman. The rest of council, the mayor, the HR director, the economic development director, service director, recreation development director, special assistant to the mayor, assistant finance director, and guests. On the agenda is resolution 2023-30, which is a resolution authorizing the director of economic and community development to solicit statements of qualifications from qualified individuals of firms to provide housing market analysis for the state of North Olmsted, including Forest Elementary School property, and further authorize the mayor following approval of the board of control to enter into contracts on review and selection of statement of qualifications. Madam Mayor, do you want to go or?
Mr. Chairman, Director Upton.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. To the question that you had earlier with respect to housing, this particular legislation in front of you, again, it takes some recommendations contained within the 2015 master plan under improving housing choices. That particular item called for the city to conduct a housing study to determine the demand and strategic location for different types of housing for population, including seniors, young professionals, and empty nesters. The study further talking with respect to the 2015 master plan, said that we should evaluate some of the zoning code constraints contained therein. Fast forward to today, we are presented with an opportunity with respect to the school site to not only own the property, which we are now the proud owners of as of this morning, and so not only own the property, facilitate the demolition and the disposition. And so in order to understand what should go there, we want to understand the gaps in the housing supply, right? What is it? Single-story masters? Is it some of the attached townhome style housing that is really interesting to young professionals? We haven't had that. What are the gaps, and then what is the highest and best use of force? And we want to get those two to align closely so that when we take it to market, we're bringing a product online that isn't oversaturating the market. It's meeting a demand for both a need within the market and a strategic niche where we have a high degree of confidence that the units will sell and the city will reap the benefits of having new housing on the forest site. Not only that, but then an understanding overall of where our housing market is. Like the consultants said, right now, our apartment, so the city council changed the definition of apartment, because before it was, I call them a shoebox, right? It's the garden style, you walk in, you have the CMU brick walls and the stairway, and it's just one stacked on top of another. Well, we see in Westlake and River, in our peer communities, these townhome style apartments that are coming up. So what is that market demand for us? What are those price points? All of those sorts of things. Questions that we want this particular analysis to take a look at.
I wanna make sure I understand what the housing analysis scope is. Does it look at the zoning in the area surrounding the forest property, or is this all strictly statistical analysis of what type of housing could
It's
be
the latter.
benefit?
So it's not particularly concerned about what forest zoning is. It is a statistical analysis that says we have X supply of Y type of housing. We think that the demand over the next 5 years is gonna be Z, and the gap of housing units is some number that we could deliver to market to fulfill that gap.
So this is all form and non-function of the properties itself. Got it. That helps. What form of housing, right?
Yes, yes.
Any questions from committee? Ms. Heeman?
Yeah, I don't have a question so much as a comment. I think that this is the right approach to take because we don't want developers dictating to us what they want to build here. We want to be able to say that, look, we've got this plan, and thank you so much, that was such a nice meeting, but your plan doesn't fit ours, okay? So if you're not set up to choose, then, you know, we're not in a driver's seat. So I really think we need this.
Could not agree more. If there was anything in the history of this city that is an observation, is that whatever they were willing to build, we built, and it looks very similar. So looking forward to making sure that we have a vision up for that. Any other questions from committee? Questions from council? Do we have any idea what the cost of this will be?
I believe, I'm looking at Keith, but I believe Director Copper had an initial set aside of, I think it was like $75,000 in ARPA funding. I really don't, I hope it's nowhere close to that, but that's what Director Copper had set aside in the initial tranche of ARPA funding relative to the demolition forest was there. So anything that's below that will be reallocated towards the actual demolition itself. So that's the long and short of it.
Okay. Alright, no other questions at this time. I'd like to make a motion to recommend resolution 2023-30 and ask for a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0. And I'll conclude the Building Zone Development Committee meeting at 7:54 p.m.
I will call the Recreation, Public Parks and Buildings Committee to order at 7:53. Present are all of council, all committee members. We have got the Recreation Director, we have the HR Director, Special Assistant to the Mayor. We have the Economic Development Director, the Mayor, the Law Director, the Service Director, Assistant Finance Director, and guests. And we are here to discuss first 2023-24, which is an ordinance amending section 145.99D of chapter 145 of the Administrative Code entitled Department of Recreation and Public Engagement for the purpose of creating part-time support personnel in the Division of Aging and declaring an emergency. And this essentially is adding a part-time support staff person in our Division of Aging. And Director Pinchuk, would you like to tell us about that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This essentially is just a housekeeping item from 2022-6 ordinance, section 9, letter E, under Division of Aging. It already lists the support personnel as number 7, but on the org chart that year it did not include it. So we're just trying to make sure it's consistent. That's all.
Are there any questions? If not, I have a question.
Sure.
So the salary is in the budget already?
The salary is in the
Yeah,
budget.
okay.
$16,000 of part-time receptionist position, support personnel for the senior center. but we weren't able to do that unless we amended
Put
this,
it in
yes.
the order chart, yeah, okay.
So,
All right, do we have any questions from committee? Yeah, Mr. Stark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this individual is working now or not yet?
they are not yet, yes, yeah.
Council, any questions? Okay, I'd like to make a motion, to recommend 2023-24 to all of council and ask for a second.
Second.
All in favor? Motion passes 3-0. We will now move on to 2023-25. A resolution dispensing with the RFP process and authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with Vasco Sports Contractors to provide for turf maintenance at the recreation center and declaring an emergency. And this obviously is, the turf maintenance of our brand new field house, which is really nice, by the way. Would you like Director Princhek to address this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, this is a contract with Vasco Sports Contractors for a 4-year biannual advanced field care program, which includes disinfectant spray twice a year to protect from staph and other bacteria on the turf, deep field compaction, redistribute and clean infield back into the field with a power brush, as well as taking depth of our pellets and our sand just to make sure we're compliant according to our Genius system. This is just an extra precaution, but we can never be too safe when it comes to staph and infections on artificial turf. So this will expire after 4 years, and we'll be back to council for a renewal at that time.
All right, I have a question. So we have this extremely high quality, right, product. Is this sufficient maintenance for it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this was recommended by Field Turf themselves, the manufacturer, as well as the installers, to go with some type of maintenance.
Sure,
service
okay.
for this.
Well, because that infection thing, you know.
It's scary, yeah.
It very,
Yeah,
very.
for sure.
Okay, well, so if then you think it's adequate, they recommended it, it seems to be reasonably priced as far as I'm concerned. Do we have any questions from committee? Sure, Mr.
Just a comment, when we, there for the opening, with the garage door there,
Yes, sir.
we may wanna look at some preventative, whether it's carpet or something from that door to that back lot to keep it maintained as well, and keep the dirt out. I know a lot of it's sweat we're talking about here, but if there's something that we need to procure for that back garage door to keep
So
the
the
dirt
garage
and
doors-
mud.
Okay, I
For
got you.
people
Well,
coming.
that's gonna actually, beyond the garage door, it will be paved. So that'll be cement asphalt at that very soon.
Okay.
The service department is actually gonna be working on that shortly.
Okay,
Yeah, so that should prevent a lot of that.
Okay. Yeah, cause it was pretty,
Yeah, yeah.
it
It's
was
still-
bringing in a lot of
Still a
foreign
construction
substances
zone
in
right
there.
now, but
Yeah,
for
okay.
sure.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Council, Ms. Williamson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, if there's like the 2 times a year it's sanitized,
Yes.
is there some kind of antimicrobial component within
There
this
is.
product?
There is on the pellets themselves and the sand. So we will distribute and fluff and, replenish the pellets as well throughout the course of time. This is an extra precaution for them to come in twice a year to do their due diligence as well. So we're overly protective, but just never err on the side of safe.
Right.
So,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'd like to make a motion to recommend 2023-25 and ask for a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0. And I will conclude at 7:59 p.m. Thank you.
Okay, finance will begin at 7:59 p.m. Present are all of council, the mayor, law director, directors of HR, economic development, service, recreation, special assistant to the mayor, and the assistant finance director, and guests. We have 5 items on the agenda tonight. First is our recurring 2023-21, the permanent budget. To say straight out at the beginning, I think making any changes, we should wait further for the finance director to return. But I did want to share some updates on information that was both provided by the finance director and that which our clerk and I each have come across since the last time we met. But before I get into that, wanted to offer, Mr. Sperling, if there's anything you wanted to communicate tonight first.
No, I think we explained most of everything we needed to in the both Trade's memo and the response to the email.
Okay. Just one technical question I had for you. We have in these documents, we have a backlog of years of tax records. 2007 is missing. It goes 2008 to 2006.
Oh, okay, I didn't notice that.
Okay. I was just wondering if there was a...
No, but just an oversight.
Okay. All right. So a few things on this. Enduring question of what is our income tax revenue going to be? Some basic things. We've gotten responses from 3 other cities. We are projecting ours at a loss of 12.6% right now. So for context, in the pandemic shutdown, we only went down 9. In the 2008 housing crisis, we only went down 6. So we are well eclipsing that with this negative projection. In the documentation we received today, we are down for the year to date 3.5%. That's not 3.5% versus the projection, that's 3.5% versus last year. If we collected at the same 3.5% down for the year, we would have $2 million more in this budget than is currently forecasted. Our peer communities, right now, the information we got was that Bay Village is projecting a 9% growth over last year. Westlake is a 1% decrease, and Fairview is projecting a negative 2.75% decrease. So again, we are an outlier both to the year to date and to our projections right now. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
If I may,
Mr. Sperling?
two things. First, on those 3 communities that you looked at, we did a little research on those as well. The Bay Village number that you have, this 2022 budgeted number, was actually the original budget for 2022. Their final budget was $9.5 million. Their actual came in a little bit higher than that, 9.56. So that would actually be a 17% decrease to their budget for what they're budgeting in 2023, which is good. So I just think your numbers might have been a little bit off.
Okay, well, we'll check in with Bay Village on that. It's a radically different projection relative to what they communicated directly to us.
Yeah, we got communication too from them.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wilbert?
Yeah, I'm really confused on like who we're supposed to compare with for our economic development and revenue. Like, we're looking at Bay Village, Westlake, Fairview, consultants are telling us that we're closer to Lakewood and Parma, and like I'm confused on who I'm supposed to compare peer group wise for our budget. I don't know. Keith, if you have any thoughts of who are good comps for?
I mean, it's actually pretty hard to compare communities, I think, when it comes to income taxes, because you really have to look at all the facets of what businesses you have, what your population base is, and there's just so many factors that come into that. It's kind of hard to compare communities. You can get a baseline, I think, of certain things, but as an overall, it's pretty hard to compare.
All right, thank you. So go ahead, Chairman.
So the purpose of my madness here is not to create an academic study on what are the best comparable communities or what is the absolute perfect way to conduct a projection. But this comes down to me, are 2 main issues, which is one, we as a council have a duty to do the appropriations. It's our role to decide whether to spend, to save, to cut. And so if we are under projecting as a method of savings, that is removing the decision-making authority from the council to do its job. Second, or sub of that, is during the temporary budget, we were led to believe that these projections would change. And so they did not. And so, which leads to my third point, which is we currently have budgeted for the end of this year $22,000 left in the general fund. Now, that's not rating the rainy day fund. We're actually putting in $100,000 more into the rainy day fund in that budget. But we have historically had $3 million or so in the general fund, going from $3 million to $22,000. If that is how this budget ends up, is not where I want to be heading into next year. And so, getting our hands on both that this is our job to do this, and then our hands on, is this a real problem or not? Will we be at 2 million in the general fund at the end of the year? Will we be at 1 million? Will we be at 22,000? Getting that handle is what I'm trying to drive at. And so how I would recommend us passing this permanent budget, just my view, depends upon the answer to that question. If we have $2 million in the general fund at the end of this year, I feel very differently than 22,000. And so and I can get into the specifics of the different components of the income tax and where I think there are issues or not. And it's up to this whole body what to decide. But I don't want myself or anyone else in this body to move forward assuming everything's going to be fine if 22,000 is what we have on.
So are you recommend, so we typically have 2 to 3 million, right?
Yes.
So is your recommendation that we should hold or cut 2 to 3 million? And when I say cut, that would be things that we would look to, we as a council often say we discuss this in budget, right? So we're approving it. I mean, is that what you're seeing, is that there's a portion of things, which should be pretty easy because there's a lot of projects that probably aren't ready to go right now anyway, that those are flagged as the reserve projects based on the revenue assumptions changing? Or you don't have a thought, that's just, you're just academically, what are the different options, right?
It's more than academics.
Right.
So, as I said, if we have $2 million left in the bank at the end of this year, and we would have even more than that, quite frankly, if we collected what we collected last year, I would feel very different about this. I would be suggesting that we look at start cutting things. If we're at 1 million or 1.5 million, maybe I feel different about that. But I mean, I'll be blunt. I don't know how we get a projection that is a drop of 12.6% that eclipses COVID, that eclipses the 2008 real estate crisis, that we have spending for out-of-state travel, that we have spending for all kinds of training and other such things, at the same time that we're looking at 22,000. Those don't harmonize. So we're not, including finance, budgeting as if there's going to be 22,000 left in the bank. We're all budgeting like there's 2 million still in the bank. And so we got to harmonize this one way or another. So I don't want to impose suggestions or decisions or without having the finance director to speak first. But
I would argue that the finance director isn't budgeting to 22,000. The administration is asking for certain things, and that brings the fund to this amount based on the finance director's assumptions, right? Revenue projections. So, I totally agree. Us as a council, if we want to drive a different stipulation of spending, then we should we should set those expectations to the administration of what we're gonna approve. And they would have to relook then at what those projects they wanna move forward with are. Or we're gonna accept the administration's desire to go and spend with what the projects they have are now, and accept that we're only gonna have that amount of money left in the budget. Or we go for a third thing, which is we totally don't agree with these assumptions and we have additional projects that we ask the administration of what do they wanna do in addition, because they're gonna be so far over. So, I mean, there's three options I guess you wanna take based on what we feel about the budget. But I don't know if it's the finance director. I think the finance is responsible for budgeting what the administration's agenda is, right?
If we are, if I don't want to, we are making in this budget a large amount of investments in, we're not just spending to spend for the most part. We are spending in investments, creating a community development corporation, investing in things that will, even in finance, the time clock system that will lead to a payoff down the road. So I don't want to cut our nose off to spite our face. Yeah. And so I'm fine with the general fund dropping some, especially when you're using it to make those investments that save us long-term, improve long-term. But we are not getting to make that decision when we are having a projection that eclipses any economic catastrophe, including the pandemic. That decision is being made for us by these projections. So,
Well, no. Go.
Oh, no,
Ms.
please,
Seaman?
you're the.
Okay, so I guess my only other comment then is, in that case, then we should earmark things that we think should be cut to meet what we think is gonna be the acceptable amount of budget based on this, or we accept this because we don't believe that those revenue projections are accurate, and then we're gonna have extra money that we can then provision according to the way we wanna provision, right? Like, do you want more projects or do you wanna cut projects? That's what I'm trying to understand. Based on what the budget's been proposed, are we looking at cutting things to get to the general fund back to what we typically see? Or are we saying we wanna add new projects that we think there'll be availability to include for this year, and those things should then be, proposed as additional line items pending an increase in revenue? I'm just trying to understand what we're trying to accomplish here, that's all.
again,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to accomplish is that the council is executing its own role of deciding what to do with the appropriations, and that we're not artificially modifying that with projections that are extreme. But secondly, that at the end of the day, we end up with responsible investments and responsible funds that are in reserve. So I don't believe there will be 22,000. And there's any number of things I can argue with in here as to why I don't believe there will be 22,000. And I don't want to not make investments that save us money, such as, again, the time clocks, for example, just because I've got an artificially low projection that I'm trying to react to. So we can cut things now. We can monitor this as, for example, the year to date that's negative 3.5 and would have us on a trajectory to be back at 2 million by the end of the year, and just monitor the hell out of this. And if we see those draconian level drops, we start acting. But that's I think the most likely option, is that we end up monitoring this very precisely going forward, and we'll see who's correct, so to speak. But there are some things that we could alter in this budget, and as I said, there are things that we are budgeting for that reflect as if we have $2 or $3 million at the end of the year. And so, I want to allow for Ms. Williamson and then Ms. Heeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. do we know where this 12.6 loss in, or the projection is coming from, and why it's so different from last year? Because what were the projections that we were going into at this time last year? Does anyone recall? Keith? Sorry.
It was 33,000. Was last year's projection at the time of the permanent budget for the general fund.
So it would have been a decrease in, what would the percentage have been at that point? Do you?
I'm not sure offhand.
We
That was
ended-
the projected fund balance at the end of 2022.
And what did we end up with?
45.
6.6.
I'll
Come back.
briefly, I'll come back to your question. I want to let Ms. Egan speak first. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's like, okay, I'm not on the finance committee, but if I were the chair, I'd be saying, these are my recommendations. So if you have them, we'd like to hear them. If you don't have them, and you're asking us for them, which is what I feel like, you're asking, you wanna cut things, let's look at it. Sadly, in the budget process, we were adding things, is my recollection. Okay, we had one council person wanted an extra electric bike, then we wanted more light poles. So we were adding, and now, we don't have enough. Or you think we might not because there is what appears to be an artificially low projection. Okay, so if you wanna talk about cutting some things, let's talk about it. Okay, but going around in a circle about it is, you wanna wait for the finance director to be here, that's fine too. But I think we have to start to make choices and, tell us what you think they are, and let's take it going, I guess.
Just briefly, I think we would be getting to the choices segment of this process if we had everyone here.
Okay.
And so I'm
Okay.
trying to be respectful of
That's fine.
the process and whatnot. Mr. Scarrow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in agreement with Councilwoman Heeman. If, when the time comes, we need to make the cuts, but in the response to Councilman Limper, I'm not in favor of looking to spend more projects or anything on an if-come basis, but I am in favor until we see how this plays out for the 33,000 versus ended up being 6 million. I'll take my chances with this 22,000 being 2 to 3 million. So I have to monitor it. Thank you.
I'll save some of this for next week when the finance director can speak for herself. Just very briefly, and we'll ask Mr. Sperling to describe the finance director's motives if I'm misstating. Income tax is made of 3 components. The withholdings that are from people's paychecks, individuals who are on their own, not with a larger business, and net profit. The projection we have for this year is the same as last year for the withholding, the normal employees at businesses. What's different are the other two. And so for individuals, we collected 2.5 million. We're projecting in this budget 2 million. So that's almost a 20% drop. I have no idea why that is. The larger though piece of this is that net profit number. And so net profit is, think of it more like a dividend that a business owner is collecting in a given year. And so that has been up and down, and it went up a lot last year. We not only eclipsed 3 million for the first time, we went over 4 million for the first time. And so there's reason to lack confidence in that on some level. However, where the money goes kind of goes across all these 3 buckets. And so there were tax law changes at the end of 2017 that started getting implemented that incentivized businesses to file net profits. And we can get into the weeds on that, but I don't think we want to. And so as businesses have switched over to doing net profits, more of the businesses are showing up in that bucket. And so that is a driver as to why it's going up rapidly. It was going up rapidly before last year. The pandemic interrupted that process. And so is last year's collection the right number? Maybe not. But again, we're talking about Y Golf's millions of dollars in these assumptions. And that's what's driving a lot of this. So, Mr. Rollins, did you want to say anything?
I'd say that's fairly accurate. It's mostly focused on the net profit change. I mean, it was more than a 50% increase last year, so for it to get back up to that level, it seems kind of improbable. So I think what Director Coffer's intentions were to be conservative on that end and monitor it, like you're saying, during the year, throughout the year, once tax season is over, and then again in September when businesses file with their extensions, monitor that and see where we're at and see how it's coming in. I think the 22,000 number is probably going to not be the number at the end of the year. I hope it's not the number at the end of the year. So I think monitoring it is probably the best strategy. I think that's what Director Coffer is intended to do.
I'm in favor of us being conservative. We're hiring a lot of new positions this year. We're adding a lot of employees. And if we were to fall short and then have to cut people, like what happened in the past, if we're misjudging, then that's a real challenge. I mean, I don't know what the administration's position is on that, but I mean, I would prefer us be conservative with that, given the number of projects and investments we're doing, and the desire that we probably want to do some follow-on actions of those studies and actions this year in next year's budget, which would involve some additional revenue. So I would rather be a little bit conservative, given that there's a lot of exciting investment proposals going on, and there would need to be funding to act on those here. So I can see why this finance director would do that, especially given that it's 1.7 million increase. We're at 4.5, whereas 2.8 the year before, and it was, I get it, they were adding more since 2017, but it's always been around 2 million. So I mean, I agree with Ms. Heeman and Mr. Scarl that we may want to just move forward with the budget and be quick to monitor and identify some, we'll get that picture pretty quickly, it sounds like, right, Pete, from the assessments over the coming couple months, that we may be able to make any adjustments ourselves even, or I'm sure the finance director and finance and administration will be proactive, try to scale something back or hold something over the next year if it's worse than what's expected, and then if it's better, I think it positions a lot stronger following on the programs the administration's trying to do.
Susan, Jason?
No.
Okay. I'm going to move that we hold 20%.
Yeah, I just have a quick, why are we holding it?
To allow the finance director to respond to anything that's been said in the past 2 weeks, and then for us to make any adjustments.
I thought she only emailed me. I thought
Finance director did send some responses,
yeah.
But again, said some, we had a hearing a week ago, we're having a hearing tonight. There may be further explanation she wishes to give that are compelling. And if this group is compelled to believe that we're gonna end up with 22,000, I would encourage us to start cutting things. To be blunt. So, Ms. Williams?
I just want to state, if we are going to cut things, I'd prefer to do it on the front end than try to do it in the middle, because we're going to be ordering things, and that could also be a problem for us, though, if we're ordering things and then we have to go through the supply chain and then increasing costs. But then if we're bringing on new hires, we don't want to let people go or cut that while they're just getting started. So just a couple thoughts to consider.
And again, if we continued on our trajectory of our year-to-date so far, we have 2 million. So, Mr. Broussard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have until April 30th?
No,
So
March 31st. March 31st.
Thank you.
We have 2 more council meetings following today to pass this. So without calling special meetings and taking extraordinary action.
So I mean, the finance director sent a couple emails here on this. We had her in the first meeting. She sent some responses here. in none of these things is she saying that we should be upping how much reserve we have. So if we think we wanna cut, then we should start talking about that now and get things on the table so we can pass this by March 31st if we feel we have to do that. Otherwise, we should move it forward and monitor it and be prepared to do things, as we go. I mean, we have 2 more meetings, right? We've got March 7th and then March 21st, right? So otherwise, we're holding a special council meeting. So if we want to schedule, I think we should, then if we're gonna hold this, we're gonna have a meeting next week before the meeting, is what the plan is? Before the council meeting?
That would be my intention.
Right.
And again, we've discussed more. I mean, again, one of the things that stands out to me is in the finance director's memo, she says her intention is to hold the individual holdings flat. She's cutting them by almost 20%, the projection. Maybe that was a mistake. It's a $500,000 mistake, but maybe that's a mistake. But she's saying 2 different things in the same document. So, again, even $500,000 more is a meaningful difference as to where we're at the end of the year. So maybe the finance director will have a different thought about that.
That's fine, sure. I just think that we should all be thinking of what we think we need to cut if we feel that 22,000 is not available and have that ready to go in the coming meetings, so we don't have to do what we did at the temp budget, which was have a, last minute meetings on a Wednesday to get everything agreed on ARPA money and stuff like that. Like, if we think that's gonna happen, we should start working towards that now and not let another week burn of having tough conversations, right? Because these are things that we're removing from what was presented a couple months ago.
If there are council members who believe that $20,000 is where we're gonna end up, I would strongly encourage you to come with ideas in mind as to where you'd like to cut.
I would like to have a strong recommendation from the finance committee about what you'd like to see cut. I don't know, why we're gonna tell you, we're not the finance committee, okay? So I would hope that the 3 of you would have recommendations for us. And of course, we might have our own as well, but if that's the concern that the finance chair and committee has, what's your number that you wanna see as the, budget? Okay, to start next year, what's that number? We still don't know what that is. What are you comfortable with? I'd like to know that. I'd also like to know then what you're recommending, or Ms. Williamson or Mr. Lippert are recommending as things to be considered for cutting, if that's what you'd like to do.
Okay. Okay. I will move to hold 2023-21 until next week. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Lippert. All those in favor?
Aye.
Alright. 2-0 on that one. Next on the agenda, we have 2023-23 demolition of spruce. Mr. Upton, or whoever is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening, before you in 2023-23 is an appropriation for capital improvements to appropriate the monies necessary to demolish the Spruce Elementary School and then install stormwater retention facilities on a portion of the property. All of this money is courtesy of the ARPA grant that the mayor received from the county council at the end of last year.
Okay. Are there any questions on demolishing spruce? Seeing none, I would move. I'm sorry.
Can we fix the resolution number at the top of this, or the ordinance number, it's 023?
I believe the reason we're even doing this now is because it needed to be corrected for a technical reason. But yes, we can do that. couple of corrections. I would favorably recommend 2023-23 and ask for a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lippert. All those in favor? Aye. 3-0. Next is 2023-28, the annual NOPEC grant. Mr. Massarolo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is something that we get every year from NOPEC. It's required, in order for us to receive the money, it is required that council pass legislation accepting it, and we have to fill out a community profile. NOPEC this year is giving, for however many people we have enrolled on electric and gas as of January 1st of 2023, we get $4 per enrolled account for gas, and we get $6 per enrolled account for electric. That's what it is this year, which comes to a total for the city of North Olmsted to be $87,896 that can be used on energy efficiency. Those are for things such as purchasing electric vehicles, energy efficient windows, solar powered LED stop signs and generators, energy efficient break room appliances, service garage insulation, and 1,000 other things. As long as it's somehow an energy efficient purchase or product, we can apply this funding towards that. We would have until November 30th of 2025 to spend down the money that we're receiving this year.
Okay, couple of questions. When we had this come up last year, we did not have immediate plans for spending the funds that we got last year. Have we spent those? Where'd they go, if so?
I don't know if the mayor looked at anything additional to what I'm about to say, but we right now are expecting a report back on energy efficiency from the Aparto sometime this week or next week. I believe it's this week. We are kind of waiting until we get that report back to determine where the best spots to spend some energy efficiency money is. So we might be able to use some of this money to apply towards some of those projects. So as of right now, we don't have any exact solid, we have some ideas that we're kicking around, but we want to kind of wait and see what that report comes to. We're making wise choices with the money.
Great. Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'd move to favorably recommend 2023-28 and ask for a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lippert. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0. Next is 2023-29, which is our vision benefits, renewing that contract. I think I read it at the same cost as last year. One of my favorite phrases.
So this is legislation that would allow us to extend our current agreement with Vision Benefits of America. Some of you may recall back in 2019 when Union Eye Care abruptly shut their doors on us with no notice. And so at that time we did go out, or our broker went out and solicited proposals. And we entered into a 48-month agreement with VBA, and that had an option to extend for 24 months. Our original agreement with them is going to be expired at the end of June of this year. But the interesting thing is our current CBAs have specific language that states they get Vision Benefits of America vision coverage. And those CBAs don't expire until the end of this year. So we would like to extend that 24-month, and then they have agreed to add 6 months, which would put us on a calendar year basis so that we can go back out to market like we normally do with healthcare on a calendar year.
Great. Any questions? So all seems clear. In that case, I will move to favorably recommend 2023-29 and ask for a second. Second by Mr. Lippert. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0. Last on our list is 2023-31, which is an agreement with Cintas to do all sorts of cleaning services for us.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Carney.
This is for uniforms for fleet, service, wastewater, and I believe rec house.
Yep.
And also all the floor Manchester first aid kits, some cleaning supplies, and a lot of paper supplies we buy from them. Any other questions?
Any questions from committee? Mr. Lippert.
Yeah, so for paper supplies, that's.
Not paper supplies, cleaning supplies.
Does that expand out to fire and police for cleaning supplies?
Well, we do the, yes,
It
we
does,
take
okay.
care of those.
Yeah, so it's everyone, it's just those
All
users
of
for
them.
uniforms, then everybody for cleaning supplies. I always have to ask that, because police and fire seem to have everything on their own line items. Cause they don't, the fire does their own uniforms, right? They're able to keep
Oh, no,
that, the machine
the
gun.
police and fire uniforms are not involved in this.
Right, cause the fire has their own machine
Fire
gun.
department, all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So this is the uniforms, but this is also things like floor mats.
Yeah.
So that might be in the police.
And mop hand, mop pads, I mean,
Yeah.
floor up.
Yeah, cleaning supplies, okay, great, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, I would favorably recommend 2023-31 and ask for a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lippert, all those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, and we'll conclude finance at 8:36.
I get this email from Nicole, and it goes, can you come by my office
I got
really
that.
quick? I got something really
I got it
important for
too.
you. But reply in this email.
I got that.